Hi y'all, welcome back to the garden. I'm going to do a little planting today. My perennials from Walter's Gardens arrived, and because of my business I'm able to get them bare root and plugs. So if you are a florist or you grow cut flowers, you can order from them. You'll have to get an account set up. But they have the best quality of some plugs and bare root plants that I have ever seen. I've ordered from a couple places before and I always just go back there. So I'm going to show you I went over most of these perennials earlier this year when I did a video about all the perennials I'm going to be planting. I did add a couple things to that because they weren't available when I originally placed the order, and they kind of became available later. So let's look at the plugs first. So a lot of the plugs themselves, I've got them on the back of the truck so I can back it out during sun. We did have a frost last night and I didn't want these getting nipped, but the temperatures look good so I can officially set these down and give them water. The hydrangea's wilting a little bit because it's been inside as well because of the frost. I didn't want it to get those buds, but we've got some echinacea here that need some water. A lot of the plugs are heuchera. So this is peachberry ice, I think. And then we have this black pearl. I really like black pearl. There's one of every color because I'm going to be doing a heuchera river this year throughout the front garden, and then I'll just be placing some extra heuchera elsewhere in the garden. If you've been following along, you know I discovered this idea in a book by 𝗟𝗏 Nurseries, which is also another wholesale grower out in Oregon or Washington, a couple years ago. And I tried this heuchera river idea a couple years ago at the last house. It wasn't so much like a river, it was just kind of underplanted in a straight bed, but it failed pretty miserably because I didn't get all proven winners varieties of heuchera. And I tell you in videos a lot of times that if you've not tried proven winners varieties of heuchera, to do so, because many of their varieties are really resilient, and all of the non-proven winner varieties that I planted almost didn't make it. So this year I decided to do the same thing, so I have about one of every color. I got two purples, originally ordered one purple, and it wasn't available, or they canceled that order, and I got another one and they reinstated the order of the purple. So I have two purples, which is fine, but I'm going to be doing it, I think I've kind of decided this week, up around where the boxwoods are curved, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then I have a bunch of boxes, and this specifically is serendipity allium that I'm going to be planted. I won't get everything planted today. I'm more focused today probably on planting the bare roots, because the bare roots come in boxes. I just learned a couple months ago from following Walter's Gardens on Instagram. They dig these things late winter, and they put them in boxes and then put it in a giant refrigerator, which keeps these bare roots dormant for a couple months until they're shipped to us. So these things need to be planted in the ground first. These other plugs can obviously be watered and they will be fine over the next week or so until I can get them in the ground. Now heuchera specifically, I don't grow them for their blooms. Although they do bloom, I don't necessarily love the bloom. They're good in like cut flower arrangements. You can cut a bloom here or there, add it to a cut flower arrangement. They're kind of like hostas. I don't enjoy the blooms on hostas either, but they're there. Sometimes you can cut them off when they start growing or blooming if you want to, or you can just wait till they bloom out, because they come in white, pink, I think there's some red, so there's all sorts of blooms available on heuchera, but the foliage and the different colors that it offers for a shade garden, and some of these can even take sun, is incredible. So let's take a look at this shade garden right quick, because it has a few heuchera in it I planted last year. There's one over here. This one's called, I think it's called prom dress. They've gotten really fancy with their names recently and I don't remember them all. You can see this is the older foliage from last year. All the new foliage is more upright there, but really good and nice. And then there's one called ball gown, I think. These may be reversed, and it's more of a chartreuse, so I think I got this one in my order sitting over there. And then there is a red one. I'm not sure if this is mahogany monster or there's another variety. They have a ton of different 𝗟𝗄𝗯, and they've also got some varieties called 𝗟𝗄𝗯𝗄, which is a combination between 𝗟𝗄𝗯 and 𝗟𝗄𝗯. The 𝗟𝗄𝗯 typically have more lobed leaves, and they're really vigorous. And so Red Rover, which I ordered, is my favorite 𝗟𝗄𝗯. Super vigorous, grows really quickly, and takes full sun here, which is incredible. Look at this dogwood here that's doing so good. This is Golden Shadows, and if you prune it, you can kind of prune it into a tree form. That's kind of what it's intended to be. But I like how it's kind of growing outward here and more horizontal, and it'll continue to grow up and just grow like very airy branches out to the side. Got some little blooms on it, but this spring foliage, we have had a couple frosts. It's gorgeous, especially compared with, or in addition to that heuchera right there. A lot of the hostas that I planted are from Great Garden plants that I got last year coming up. Ferns are coming up good. This bed seems to have been protected a little bit from the freeze, and I'm going to come through probably in the next week or so when I have time and cut back these hydrangeas. This is Tough Stuff Top Fun here, and you can see this top growth right here is brittle and dead, and so I'm going to cut it down till I see a bud. Typically mountain hydrangeas are hardier than the macrophyllus here. This is serrata, which is mountain hydrangea serrata, and the buds are a little hardier, so I should get good blooms on this year, but they still can die back a little bit in our weather. There's a lot of crocus foliage left over everywhere that will die down as it gets warmer in these beds, but it was really beautiful in the spring or the late winter when they started coming up. We also have some other things in here. Here's another hydrangea. I think this one is, I think it's 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲. I would have to look and see what I got back. There's a sky view over here that was pretty small when I got it last year that's coming up nicely. This is a Sun King Aurelia, which I thought was dead and just started showing signs of growth. And the reason I thought it was dead is because there's another one right there, and look how big that one is. Great shade plant, and it takes a lot of shade too. It turns a brilliant yellow depending on how much sun it gets, but it becomes almost a shrub by the end of the season. That's how nice it fills out. Got some gems down here. This is Pretty Coats Peach, which I really love. Blooms pretty early. Gems are really nice perennials, which aren't advertised a whole lot, but they make really beautiful spring interests for everyone. They continue to bloom here and there throughout the season, but the bulk of the blooms come this spring, and a lot of my 𝗟𝗂𝗏 is coming up. I'm hopeful that this bed is going to fill out really nicely this year, since it's one of the first things I got planted last fall after I moved in. Let's talk about what I didn't get done, and that was the irrigation. After I shot the last video, if you watched it, you know I said that I was going to get out and do the irrigation. Well, after I shot that video, the temperature outside was low and the sun completely went away, and so it was too cold and windy to get out there for me to do irrigation. And then it's been pretty cool and windy all week, so I've not been able to get outside and do anything in the garden, which has been a little bit of an impairment this time of year. But it's warming up now, and I should be able to get more done now. I also just wanted to show y'all these Parissima tulips, which they're almost bloomed out now, but I got a second set of blooms out of them. The big bloom bloomed a while back, and it's these right here, which need to be snipped off so they're not trying to set seed and the energy can go back to the bulb. So that's another project I need to do, lots to do in the garden this time of year. But it put up a tiny, tiny shoot of second bloom. So the blooms were a little smaller, but still really nice right here. So I'm impressed with these. We'll see if they return next year. Tulips don't tend to return super great all the time here, depending on what variety they are, but I'll be excited if they do, because this was a nice surprise. I'm a bit frustrated at it always happens here, so it was bound to happen. The late freeze we had. Last night, it wasn't too bad last night here, it was worse earlier this week. It did damage to the leaves of this Japanese maple that I showed you. That was so beautiful in either the last video or the video before. So it'll be okay. these leaves will probably crumble up and turn brown a little bit. But I can go through after they dry up and maybe pick them off, because it's mostly that was further away and not protected as much from the house. I probably could have covered this Japanese maple. The problem is it's super windy here in spring, and covering something with a blanket is almost impossible unless you're going to stake it down really hard. And I'm also not one of those gardeners who spends a lot of time doing that stuff in the spring. I don't want to grow plants that require a lot of fussing with, and it will be perfectly fine. It'll recover fine. The damage is minimal, so we'll deal with it for this year. I have these peonies on this corner of the house here that are massive. You can tell these have been here for a very, very long time. There's 2 clumps. And look at all those buds on there. I should probably go through if I wanted bigger blooms and remove these side shoots, but I'm not going to worry about it so much. These are getting so much sun. They're so much more ahead than all the other peonies in the garden, and they're going to get moved later after they finish blooming. But you can see how big this bud is right here. It's not quite marshmallowy, but it's getting there. And so there'll be some very beautiful, I don't know what color they are. Looks like they might be a whitish based on that bud bloom, but gorgeous nonetheless. And I'll move them to the cut flower garden or somewhere else where I can actually put a shrub here, because after these bloom, they don't look so great. And this isn't a side of the house that gets a lot of views from like the road or from the sidewalk or anything as you enter, but you can tell I've not put much attention on this side of the house since moving in. But this needs to be edged, and I still need to remove this viburnum that's right here. These are the ones that give me such a fit that I'm allergic to, and it just went out of bloom, so it's looking a little rough and shaggy, and now would be the time to cut it back and remove it. So lots to do on this side of the house, but it's not a huge focus this year or immediately. So these are the hydrangea hedge that I planted in the last video, and you can see they are virtually unfazed by the freeze. I've seen a lot of comments recently of people concerned about covering these in the spring when they have a late frost. These aren't the ones you should be concerned about. Hydrangea paniculata. Hydrangea macrophylla, maybe if it's going to be really cold, those leaves are a little more succulent and can get more damage. Hydrangea serrata, maybe. Annabelle hydrangeas, not so much, and paniculatas, not at all. I mean, we'll get a close-up of this foliage from just a couple days ago, and it froze pretty hard, and you can see it's perfectly fine. These have transitioned into the ground really well, and I'm just keeping an eye on them and making sure they get enough water as it heats up here recently, and then I'll come through, like I said, and try and edge this bed. That's going to be quite a project. And I've got all this other stuff to plant first, so it's probably not going to be something super high on the priority list right now, although it looks pretty bad. All right, so we're going to start with some of these bare root ones that I mentioned, and the first one I'm actually going to start with is serendipity allium. Serendipity, allium, and alliums in general are some of my favorite things to plant in the garden. They provide blooming interest in summer, late summer, usually mid to late summer. They're basically a smaller version of the bulb allium that you plant in spring. They are rabbit resistant because they are onions, but they don't like smell bad if you have them in your garden, unless you're like brushing against them and working in them. But when you get them bare root from the garden center or Walter's Gardens, the roots smell like onions, and so my whole garage smells like onions from getting these yesterday. And this is what the bare root looks like here, and you can see it's already starting to push new foliage. This is a really pretty big plant, but based on my experience on planting these previously, I didn't get any blooms on them when I planted them bare root at the last garden. So a lot of these are going to be going right here at the front of this bed here, along with what I have behind me here, which is Wizard of Oz Veronica, which is this bare root right here. This garden, I don't know what it'll look like this year. These plants will wake up and grow, but it may take them a few weeks and they'll be behind what they normally would be in the garden. So blooming times this year may be off. And how I'm going to plant this, I don't typically do like any formal spacing. I do like to plant my plants pretty closely together. I've been doing this long enough that I can just kind of dig the holes about what I know their final size is going to be. If you're new to any of these plants, I'd recommend you look up the sizing online on Proven Winner's website, or whatever website the plant came from's brand, or generally just Google it because you'll find it somewhere. And spacing is all preference anyway. You could do a whole mass of them and it would just be one big patch, or you can space it so there's a little evenness between them. The alliums will need divided over the years. They'll get bigger and bigger, they clump up. So I am not going to space them super far apart though. I want them to fill out more quickly, so I'm going to be spacing them as I would like to this year. I probably should have ordered more of these alliums because I'm going to be putting some here and putting some over on the other side of the garden near the sidewalk. But we're going to get started. I am going to be roughly following the sketch that I showed you in January. I'll put that on the screen because I don't have any big plans for some of these perennials that I'm getting. I'm just going to be poking them where I think they would look nice, but I do have somewhat of a plan going into this based on the sketch I did in December, January. And these bare roots come in boxes of 25 usually, so I know based on how many holes I dig how many I'll have left over. And this is, I'm going to be using the power planter today with the longer auger that's about 4 inches or so. It's about the perfect size to put these in the ground, and it'll make it easier to get these planted super quickly and then watered in as they start growing in this spring. Okay, so I got all of the alliums planted. Like I said, there was 25 of them. Planted them here next to the sidewalk. They are great companions to roses. They look great with roses, so I planted them next to these flavorette roses that I'm growing. The others were planted over there, and I did end up sticking a couple behind this Venus dogwood on kind of the front side of this border here. So what I have now next is 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 phlox. I had this planted under the willow, so it was a pretty shady area at the last house. It is a very short phlox, less than 2 foot, but I love how the leaves are so thready and it blows in the wind and it forms a nice thick carpet. So I'm going to be planting it on the other side of this rose around this iris down here. In this whole area. And actually when they come in, it was a 2-for-1 box, which I didn't realize I was getting. So I have more than I had anticipated using right here. So I'll put some here and I'll probably move some to the other side over here as well. Really love this one. It is low, so it'll grow kind of behind these roses, but you'll still be able to see it probably from all sides of the bed just because it's so striking and it blooms almost all year. A little more blooms when it initially blooms, but then it has some throughout the rest of the season, which is nice. And I'm going to be planting these really closely together because I want it to form, I have double the amount that I thought I was getting, so I want it to form a carpet pretty thickly to help weed growth and also just provide some more beauty in this area. Now you might have noticed that I didn't put any fertilizers in any of the holes of the perennials I was growing. I think people's perception of fertilizer and needing fertilizer is greater than what the actual need is. If you're starting a new garden bed, maybe. If you're not mulching consistently and providing good organic matter to break down, probably. If you live in areas where the soil has a lot of sand in it and nutrients just get flushed through it really quickly, you need more fertilizer. But here in Ohio and a lot of areas of the country, we have clay. Clay holds lots of nutrients, and so I'll probably be spreading a fertilizer over the area, but I'm not going to be fertilizing each plant because that would take a little longer to plant. Allium specifically are kind of heavy feeders, so you might want to give them a little more fertilizer than you would other things, but this is also these plants' first year, so their focus needs to be roots for perennials anyway. So don't worry necessarily about the brand of fertilizer you're putting down. I would encourage you to use organic fertilizer just because it's good for the soil, better for the soil, helps build soil. But organic fertilizers can be expensive, so use what you have available to you. Just understand feeding the soil and building the soil for your garden so it will do better for you and require less inputs over time is helpful. All right, y'all, it is just over a week later. I started the last video on Thursday and I worked Thursday evening, Friday evening, and almost all day Saturday because the weather was pretty good Saturday. And then I was worn out on Sunday and I haven't done much in the garden since. So I'm going to show you what I got planted. I did obviously shoot some video of digging the perennials or planting the perennials, but I didn't record all of it because obviously it's just digging or drilling like 400 or 500 holes, and that's not particularly interesting. So I'm going to show you kind of the design that I went with, and it very much matches kind of what I designed last December, January, and I'll pop the picture on the screen again. I do have a little more space, I think, than I had when I anticipated and designed that plan. So there's some space up here at the front of this bed that I extended out. I think because I extended it out a little further than I had originally anticipated. So that's good though. I can put some of the annuals I'm getting here because I'm also getting like 500-600 annuals. A lot of those are bedding begonias and sun patience. Probably the bulk of those are. And then I have some proven winners annuals for containers and also in-ground planting as well. But I got a nice chunk of corner here where I can plant some stuff in that'll be beautiful this season. So I've turned the camera around. You're not going to be able to see a whole lot, but you will get to see how much these perennials grow in a week after getting in the ground. I don't have drip completely down in this area yet. I did put some drip down last year, just the single black tubing to water the trees. I've not activated any of my drip yet, but it's getting warm here soon and I'm going to have to do that. So once I get the rest of the perennials planted and some of the annuals, I will come through and put down some drip emitter tubing that's spaced probably every 16 inches or 18 inches is typically what I use. And I will focus that on probably mostly the annual locations and then some of the perennials that like a little more water. Some of the perennials I planted, like yarrow, don't necessarily like a whole lot of water, so I'm not going to focus on watering them a whole lot. But what that means is in the summer, if we're having a drought or anything, I may have to come out here and do some overhead sprinkler watering. So you saw me plant the alliums, which the serendipity alliums here are already coming up. And this is a week's growth, just over a week's growth right here. So they were ready to go. Next to it, I planted the Wizard of Oz, AHHS, Oz, like excited, Veronica. And then I came out and planted this morning the one in a melon cone flowers. So this looks exactly like the photo that I showed on the screen. I did plant my Proudberry Coralberry right here. That's the one that produces the pink berries that I like so much. And then I don't have any perennials right now in this square, basically down here. There is a rose, which was one of my favorites, called the Poet's Wife, a beautiful yellow that was from Heirloom Roses this year. And I got it in the ground last week as well. And it's a David Austin. So it's a own root David Austin, so it'll do really well here. It's already starting to put on new leaves. The Poet's Wife is pretty vigorous, and we'll see how quickly it blooms. Backing up a little bit, as I mentioned, I have no perennials necessarily right here, but I'm thinking about, you can see there's some yarrow that starts there, doing just a swoop of annuals here. If you'll remember a video several weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I mentioned putting a stone path through here, and as I got to planting, I completely forgot about it. So I may have to dig a few of those up if I find that it's particularly annoying to have to walk all the way around this bed to enter the front yard, but I'll probably put some stepping stones elsewhere throughout to just kind of step through. the garden as I feel is necessary. I do have some lavender left over, which I'm going to place in here somewhere. I am waiting to plant that a little. I'll probably do it this weekend. So I just haven't got to all of the lavender wasn't bare root, and I've not planted all of the plugs yet. This is peach sky yarrow, and you can see it was ready to go too. The bare roots were huge on those. So there is a swoop that comes here, and it goes a little this way and then back towards those fire chief arborvitae. Next to that, I have cat mint, and that is a chartreuse on the loose. So it's supposed to be a very yellow cat mint, so it'll be a nice striking color compared to this star power juniper, which is right here. Right now it's emerging and it's not so much yellow, but when it gets a little more sun, it will turn more yellow, hopefully. Let's walk back this way a little bit. And I planted some 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 down here. I really planned to have 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 here, and then I got to thinking about it, and I was like, well, the color of this tree is already red, and these are dark side of the moon, so the foliage might actually be a little darker or very similar red color, but it's not going to be too bad right here. These are 1 in a melon coneflowers down here, so that's a nice yellow bloom. These will come up earlier, and then these, the interest in these will be their flower, which I think is a purple color, and they'll be a little later this year than usual, but it'll be a nice contrasting texture right here as well as flower color. I did plant this Illuminati Sparks mock orange down here. It's really tiny. You may see a lot of things coming up. It's all the same thing. So I don't know if the batch of bulk mulch that I got last year was bad and full of weeds, because they're across this entire garden space, but I've got to come through and hand pull a lot of those things. It's all the same weeds. So I don't know if it blew in here over winter or fall after I planted it, or more likely I got the last batch of mulch from the man I ordered it from, and it could have just been sitting there for some time and got weed seeds in it. So got to deal with that, but I'm going to let them continue growing a little bit actually, and then they'll be easier to pull up instead of being so tiny. So that is that. And then I planted some opalescence phlox in here. So there's a big patch of opalescence phlox in this area. That'll be really nice behind these roses right here, which are coral, reminiscent coral, I believe, from Proven Winners. Planted a small patch of the 1 in a melon coneflowers right here next to them as well, to bring some of the yellow from over there next to the tree to over here in this spot. And then these are Let's Dance Can Do hydrangeas that have been here for a little bit, and they did not fare winter so well. Some of them, and one of them in particular, did not at all. So all of this is dead growth, and I need to come through and cut them down. This is why I'm interested in testing a lot of macrophyllus for those of us up north, because this is what happens to our macrophyllus here. The upward growth, it gets so cold in winter. These might have fared better if they were planted in the spring. Of course, I didn't own this property in the spring, but the macrophyllus can die down and lose a significant amount of their branches in winter. But the good thing about Let's Dance Can Do is it blooms really quickly on new growth. So it's a hybrid, and I will get blooms out of this probably in the next month, maybe a little longer because it was knocked down so far, but it is coming back. This one seems to be the weakest one. It's just now starting to get some growth at the bottom, but the others right here are getting quite a lot of growth on them. So at this point, you can see how dead these branches are. You've watched me been breaking them off. I will come through and cut these all the way down to where the new growth is probably this weekend. So it won't be more difficult to do that with as quickly as these are leafing back out. I left this entire area open because I'm going to plant these probably with sun patience or some supertunias, but most likely sun patience. Behind here, this little stretch kind of right behind where these daffodil foliage is back in black sedum. So this black, really dark purple sedum will feel kind of right here in this area. You can see they're starting to come up now just in a week. Tiny, tiny little sedums. They won't be too much this year, but they'll get pretty lovely over the next couple couple of years. Next to those sedums and kind of in front here, I planted some other sedum, and this is a creepy crawly sedum called Boogie Woogie, which is a really beautiful variety, and you can see it starting to come up. It's kind of a variegated, it has a green center and yellow edges, and so I planted, you can see there, it kind of merges into this Feather Falls carex here, but there's one there, and then it kind of goes in front here, and then up towards there and kind of merges into the black, back in black. Right here, there are some tiny little hydrangeas. These are, I think they're called Tiny Quickfire. The names are getting so similar recently that it's difficult to remember, but it's the newest Proven Winners panicle hydrangea that is the smallest one. I have 5 of them here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one is coming back. The people who drilled the wells for the geothermal, so not the company we contracted with, drove through this flower bed in the fall last year, which really aggravated me, and they broke these hydrangeas, these front 2, and potentially that one too, off to the ground. But they're coming back. They will probably be really small this year. I need to come through and cut back some of the leaves or the branches that are also dead on those. I planted a small patch of opalescence phlox behind the star-powered juniper here. This area is really open still, and I think what I'm going to plant here are those cleomes that I got as annuals, because y'all told me they get really big, so that'll be a good filler for this space and be really pretty. And since it's so nice and open, in the future this tree will grow up, but for a good number of years I'll have an open space to play with some annual or perennial things that get taller here. And in the meantime, I could probably plant some other shrubs in here if I wanted to, as I plan out this space a little more. I want to show you these elephant ears. I got these elephant ears from Jung Seed, J-U-N-G. I discovered them this year, and this is a perennial elephant ear. I think it's hardy down to zone 5, and it's called polar green. So there's nothing spectacular about it. It's just a green elephant ear, but it is and hardy to our zone, and it will come back, which is unlike in most other elephant ears or any other elephant ear that I've ever seen. So polar green is that variety. I've stuck one here, and I put another one over there somewhere, and I've got one more. I ordered a total of 3 of them from Jung Seed that I will be planting somewhere after I figure out where I'm going to plant it. They can get pretty big, so up to 4 foot tall and wide. It's one of those bigger elephant ears, so I need to find the perfect space. But I think for a good number of years right there, having one there and one further down will be a really pretty kind of tropical vibe right in the middle of the bed from front to back. So it'll provide some nice height for me. I believe this is a legend of the small bottle brush. It stays pretty tiny, but has really excellent fall color and will be really pretty in the fall next to the star-powered juniper, which, let me show you since we're here. It's starting to produce berries, which I had forgot really that some junipers do. And that's going to be a nice little icy element, icy color blue with all of these other things right here. I did lose, and I need to find, or I suspect I have lost, this grass here, this lemon squeeze. Is it a pennisedum? Yeah, pennisedum lemon squeeze from Proven Winners. I really love this one. It was intended to be a nice yellow contrast to the star-powered juniper, and it doesn't appear to be coming back. I bought this as a discount plant. It was pretty rough shape, and I planted it pretty late fall, and it just didn't seem to weather the winter really well. So I need to find another one of those locally, because I do want to replace it here. I had one at the last garden and it did really well. That one was just struggling a little bit, and that can sometimes happen when you buy plants on discount that are in rough condition to begin with. It's just the risk you take. All of these right here are ever after Veronica. So I planted these. I had bought on clearance at the same time I bought that lemon squeeze grass there, and I've actually planted a few more of the bare roots. So there's one down here which is coming along really quickly in the past week. I mean, it's not far behind from where the ones I planted last year are, and then I planted some more throughout here in spots. So one of the reasons I waited a week just to come through and show you this. So you could actually see where some of the things are and the spacing on them that I've chosen. Here we've got some things, I think these might be Veronicas too, ever after, because I did plant a bunch of them in here. So it'll be a really big sweep of that beautiful like light pink or light purple color, almost a bluish tinge to it. And I'm gonna love it right there, I think. My Venus dogwood is blooming. It doesn't have huge blooms this year, but it survived winter really, really well. And as you can notice, I spaced it directly in front of that window there. So when it starts blooming in the spring, sometime in the future when it's much bigger, you can see it out that window and see the beautiful blooms from inside the home. I planted some more serendipity alliums right here in this spot. I planted a rose here called Distant Drums, which is one of my favorite roses. This one also came from Heirloom Roses, and it's actually putting on foliage really quickly. This one in my last garden was typically the first one to bloom. So next year we'll compare all the roses I got this year and we'll see which rose blooms the earliest, because these are going to be obviously a little delayed coming from somewhere else and being planted just this year. There's a little gap here because if you remember last year, I decided to space these boxwoods in like a little serpentine looking formation there. So you remember, or you may recall, I'm going to do a river of heuchera, which I think I'm going to take you along for that entire process. And as I was kind of planting perennials out here last week, I was like, wouldn't it be neat to have the heuchera river start on this end of the flower bed and go all the way and serpentine around with the boxwoods to the other side. I just think that would be really cool and really cute, and I'm thinking about doing it maybe on both sides. So have the boxwoods in the center of the heuchera, but have them serpentine all the way around. And I actually left a spot over here to do that. So all these weeds here, but there's some alliums here and there's some catmint here, but I did leave a spot potentially for the heuchera to kind of run through that area beside the catmint. So I think that'll be pretty neat. This is cat's pajamas, so it stays relatively small, and I've left a little border here so I can put annuals all the way down the sidewalk. And here's some more serendipity alliums that even seem further along than the ones I showed you up there, even though they may have been planted, I think they were planted the same day as the others. I did plant a couple of the perennials from Great Garden Plants in here, including this rose right here. This is this geum called Tempo Rose. So it's a pink color, which is a rose color geum. And then we have Arctic Fox Rose. So a lot of rose themed plants here. And it's actually blooming for me since I planted it last week. And then I came through and put a few classic coral dianthus in this area. And behind these roses here, which are flavorette, I actually have a bloom on those. I just noticed this morning. It's not a pretty one. It's kind of rough from the freezes and the frosts we've had that were late, but it's covered in buds. So this one might actually be the first one to bloom. I've not really seen buds on any of my other roses I planted last year. It's looking good though, so far. So a lot of weediness still in here to clean up. I did plant the Pinkadot phlox back here to back these roses and kind of grow up and create like a ground cover. I have the other elephant ear right here. And then I planted some backlight phlox here. So this is the phlox that gets pretty tall, 3.5 maybe feet to 4 foot tall. Beautiful pure white blooms. So it'll be striking as a backdrop to a lot of these other things I planted in this area. And I'll probably plant in this open space after I get it cleaned up some of that gomphrena, the pink gomphrena from Proven Winners. I think it'll be really lovely next to all these pinks and whites that I have in this spot. There's a lot of small tiny shrubs in here that will have to grow on, including a double quince here. This one is I think this is the orange color. And then I planted underneath here some Queen of Heart Brunnera. We have some ferns that I planted last year, and then some more of the astilbe for some red foliage color over here. A repetition of the coral dianthus, classic coral. a repetition of the purple salvia, purple profusion, and then I think I put some more of the yellow catmint here. So the yellow catmint will look really nice with the red. Purple will still be here, dark side of the moon. And then over here, I planted some more of the back and black sedum and the polka dot phlox. And then this area is probably going to have stepping stones eventually, or some pathway out to the yard. So it's starting to rain here, and I know this video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to cut it short today and pick up on the next one. There's still lots of planting to do, lots of designing to do, and there's some things blooming that I want to show you that I was not expecting to bloom this early. So that's exciting. Thank you guys for joining me, and remember, be a light. Take care.